Okay, now we are moving on to what question is this? 9-36. It says simplify and solve each equation below for x. And let's look at the first one. It says 24 equals 3x plus 3. All right, so one rule to remember about algebraic equations is that you can kind of flip-flop the way the numbers are written, as long as you keep the sign of the numbers. If this was a positive number, it needs to stay positive. If this is a negative, it needs to stay negative, and vice versa. So let's practice switching. We can rewrite it as 3x plus 3 equals 24. They mean the same thing. Okay? So I'll do it like that just because I like having my variable on this side. That's something you don't have to do every time, but just know that that option is available. We have 3x plus 3 equals 24. Once again, we need to get x alone. Get x alone. So that she can find her value. Ah, okay. So you got to get x alone so she can find her value, her worth. Right now, there are two numbers. There's a constant and a coefficient that's next to this variable. Okay? There's this term and this number in front of the variable. We're trying to get x completely alone on this side of the equal sign. All right? So we got to utilize the inverse operation. We must utilize inverse operation to make the changes happen. So there's a plus 3. What's the opposite of plus 3? Minus 3. Whatever you do on one side of the equation, of the equal sign, you do to the other. Minus 3. Okay? The beautiful thing is, this cancels out because 3 minus 3 is 0. So that canceled out on this side, and you bring down your 3x, and it's a good idea to utilize arrows so that you can stay organized with what you're doing. So 3x equals, well, what is 24 minus 3? 21. All right, that was the first step of this two-step equation. Let's do the second step. Is x alone? No, we got to get x alone. Right now, she has a coefficient in front of it, a 3. What is the operation that the 3 is doing with the x? What's that operation? They are multiplying together right now. So we must do the inverse operation. What is the opposite? Inverse operation means do the opposite. What is the opposite of multiply by 3? The opposite of multiply by 3 is divide by 3. And whatever you do on one side, you do to the other. So I like to draw the division sign like that as a fraction bar. Divide by 3. Whatever you do on one side, you do to the other. Divide by 3. Okay? Be aware that division can be represented with many different symbols. Just a side note. You can represent it with this symbol, you can represent it with this symbol, and you can also represent division with a fraction bar. So I like using the fraction bar, especially with algebraic equations, okay? So our main focus is this 3. Well, when we divide by 3, over here, this cancels out. We bring down the x. X finally knows her value. X equals, what is 21 divided by 3? 7. Okay, let's do the next problem. I'll leave these rules up here because we're going to need this information as well as a few more notes about the next problem. 2 with multiplied by quantity x minus 6 equals x minus 14. Alright, so there's a little glare right there that's kind of messing up our x. But still can't really see it. Let me scooch it around. 2 times the quantity x minus 6 equals x minus 14. Alright, that's a little bit better. So, there are a couple of rules that we need to utilize with this problem. Well, first thing, especially with algebraic equations, we need to utilize what we call PEMDAS or GEMDAS, depending on if your teacher taught you about that particular rule. PEMDAS, from elementary school, we wrote it like this, PEMDAS, which represents our order of operations, the order in which we solve equations. When we're dealing with algebraic equations, we need to remember that that variable is an unknown, so we are actually trying to solve for that variable, right? So PEMDAS, which is also known as GEMDAS, that means deal with the parentheses or the grouping symbols first. That's the first thing we deal with. These days we write it PEMDAS. PEMDAS like that because it deals with parentheses first, exponents, then we do multiplication and division, then we go down to addition or subtraction, whatever's first. Alright, so as I said, this is 2 times the quantity x minus 6. Can we combine these terms at all? The x and the 6? No, because this is a variable and this 6 does not have this particular variable on it. They are not like terms. So now we go to E, there's no exponents. Now we go to multiplication. This is being multiplied by this parentheses. So how do we deal with that? Well, we utilize what we call the distributive property. We have to use the distributive property. So we say 2 times x. Once again, I'm using arrows. It helps to keep me organized. And then what's 2 times a positive x? That gives us 2x. What is 2 times 6? We can also call that a negative 6. That'll be minus 12. 2 times 6. And that can be converted to a negative 6. We can call it minus 6. We can also call it negative 6. And that'll be a lesson with integers and stuff like that. That's something that hopefully y'all did go over, being able to change that to a plus sign and then that turns into a negative 6, da-da-da. But just for purposes for now, for this particular video, 2 times a negative 6 gives us a negative 12 equals x minus 14. Alright? So, we're at this stage. We need to go ahead and start moving things around because we want to get our variables, we want to get the variable on this side and our numbers on this side so that we can find the value of x. Alright? So, there's his x right here. I don't like that guy over there. What is the opposite of a positive x? Because this positive x is being subtracted by this 14. So, but what's the opposite of a positive x? The opposite of a positive x is a negative x, or we also call it minus x. So whatever you do on one side, you do to the other. I'm going to put it right here where this x is. Alright, so 2x minus x gives us x. And it's canceled out on this side. So we're bringing this down. X minus 12 equals negative 14. Okay? And now we almost have the value of x. We're still kind of working with it. X is not alone yet still. We got to utilize the inverse operation to get rid of whoever's over here. Well, right now x is being subtracted by 12. What's the opposite of being subtracted by 12? Add 12. Whatever you do on one side, you do to the other. Add 12. Okay? That cancels that out. X is finally alone on this side. X equals, well, what is a negative 14 plus a 12? That gives us negative 2. All right? So x equals negative 2.